Yep, all set.
All right. So yes, as Peter mentioned, it's talking about transportation. It's talking about the role in terms of the impacts from climate change, but also the role that transportation play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then a huge piece being the work of equity that needs to happen and is happening in a large part in Tompkins County throughout. So I'm just going to start with some information that Rebecca Evans shared in terms of the Ithaca Green New Deal and the greenhouse gas inventory. That's the large image that you're seeing on the right here in terms of community transportation, municipal transportation being the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the city. That's at 37.7%. And this reflects what's happening across the country, where in 2020, greenhouse gas emissions from transportation was the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2022 in New York State, 28%. I believe that was like the number 2 as it is in Ithaca. So a huge component that has to be addressed. Oftentimes, transportation is kind of the elephant in the room that people don't talk about because it seems like it's very hard to tackle. And I find that if you do hear people talking about electrification and reducing greenhouse gases related to transportation, they're talking about shifting cars, individual private cars to electric cars. And it's so much more than that and needs to be so much more than that. The high emissions in large part is because of the large number, thousands of people that commute in and out of Tompkins County, downtown Ithaca on a daily basis, as we in the region hold some of the larger employer centers. And then I want to give a sense just in terms of the percentage of drive alone in terms of getting to work. So this is for the county. You can see that 60% of people who are getting to work are driving alone, driving individually in their cars. And this is an issue that we really need to tackle just in terms of, again, the emissions. And this is in Ithaca City. You see drive alone is a much smaller percentage, but still 28.6% of how people are getting to work. So when I thought about this presentation, I thought about the dimensions. Can you guys see the heading? I can't see the heading very well, but I'm assuming you can.
Yeah, we can see it, Dawn.
Okay, so these are the dimensions I identified in terms of what it's going to take to address some of the transportation issues that we're looking at in Tompkins County. So, and I'm going to go through each of these throughout my presentation with some examples. So first one is getting people out of cars, using multimodal options where available. And when I say getting people out of cars, it's really, again, focused on this drive alone. And how do we get people to think about their automobile as something that could also be shared transportation? We know that we are small, urban, large, rural in our county. We've got a lot of people who have really oftentimes the only access can feel like the car that they're driving alone. But it's how can we also address this on a city and urban, the urban dimensions. So what I wanted to do is talk about some terms so that, again, we're all on the same page in terms of what it's going to take to move away from drive alone. So the first component, and you hear this term, it's micromobility. And in terms of a definition of micromobility, you're looking at a range of small, lightweight vehicles, bicycles, e-bikes, scooters, electric skateboards, typically below 50 miles per hour, driven by users personally. And what we're doing in terms of micromobility in Tompkins County is we've got a new bike share launched in the fall of 22 by Bike Walk Tompkins that you all have seen around in downtown Ithaca. It's just the starting point. There will be new bikes, and I think we've got Margaret on the phone here, who's director of Bike Walk Tompkins. what's important about this, you all remember that we had Lime Bike and COVID hit, and the economics were not what Lime needed it to be in terms of an international company. The users and the ridership was not as high as they needed it to be, and they left Ithaca. What we don't want is to introduce modes that then people start to use and depend upon. We did find that a lot of people were using the Lime bikes to commute to work. So essential components of their transportation options, and then have those options go away. So one of the important pieces that we talked about in the transportation community is how to ensure that we've got a service that we can manage ourselves, that isn't going to go away, and find the funding ourselves, identify the services ourselves, be responsive to the local community. And Bike Walk Tompkins really took that on and introduced Ithaca Bike Share. So the second piece I wanted to talk about is microtransit. So when you hear microtransit, that really is related to your transit, your bus operators, and typically the microtransit is for on-demand, a demand response. So it would be something like an Uber, where it's not fixed route, but you'd be able to call in, you'd be able to reserve a space. They can be much more flexible in routing, shared with other passengers, typically eight person. These are just examples from microtransit from around the world, actually. And TCAT is in the process of purchasing 4 8-passenger electric vans that will be used for on-demand services in the county, with the intention that that would expand. So diversifying the fleet in terms of size is also really important for addressing flexibility, and also being able to, for people throughout the county to be able to access transit. And there has been, TCAT had a pilot testing an on-demand where we used Gadabout, partnered with Gadabout to use some of their buses for an on-demand service, and developed an app to be able to do that. That was tested in Dryden and Lansing just before the pandemic hit. So we have some experience with on-demand microtransit here, and looking to really expand that. Multi-mobility is another term that you hear, so a lot of M's, and that's using a combination of modes to take a trip from beginning to end. And we have the transit, we have buses, we have Ithaca Car Share, we have personal bikes, we have bike share. And the idea is that these can be combined for a trip. And so proximity is really important. So it can be that people are driving in to a ride and drive spot. You park your car, you can take a bus, you can get on a bike share bike to take the rest of your trip. So can we combine multiple modes so that people again can cut back on the drive alone? And it doesn't, getting people out of cars doesn't always have to be that people give up their cars, but it can be, can you take a percentage of the days that you commute into work or take transportation for particular services in a way that you're using multiple modes? So another piece of moving people away from drive alone is, of course, changing the culture of, which is very strong and very grounded, and in many cases very necessary in our county, but can we change the culture of how people think about moving around? And we have a number of incentives that are happening right now in Tompkins County. So Go Ithaca is a program of Downtown Ithaca Alliance, which will be moving into its own entity, it'll be becoming its own entity in 2023. And it's a free program for anyone commuting to and from the Ithaca urbanized area. So there's credits, and you can see in the blue box, this is actually all the components for the Go Ithaca program. So it's a $50 credit for Ithaca Car Share. There's a $50 coupon for walking and biking gear, free registration to Backup Ride Home. Backup Ride Home is if you are using a mode of shared transportation and for some reason you need to get home in emergency, or for some reason your ride that you were going to be getting home with someone isn't available, you can use the service and you'll be provided either a taxi or a bus pass or potentially an Ithaca car share car to be able to get you home where you might have relied on a shared mode of transportation. Also part of the package is 40 TCAT passes and then 50% off of monthly signups, free access to 511, which is a carpooling network in New York State that anybody can access actually. And then discounts on day-to-day parking passes. If you are using multimodal and you need to drive in sometimes, you can get a monthly parking pass. And then just recently with the introduction of Ithaca Bike Share, it's 50% off a bike share membership. So this is a very robust program in terms of really getting people to think about using multi-modes for transportation. And again, this isn't necessarily, you need to give up your car completely, but it provides an option for people to test out our multimodal options, to get a sense of the fact that they have different ways of getting to work than taking the car, and also reducing the amount of money that you might spend on commuting. Ithaca Car Share, as you all are likely familiar, is a way that you do not need to own a car, but that you can use a car that other people are sharing. It's a huge savings for people. People spending typically over $700 a month on car ownership, insurance, updates to your car servicing, and with Ithaca Car Share, spending about $100 a month. So it's an enormous savings. Ithaca Car Share has 33 vehicles and counting. They're going to be adding a number of electric vehicles in the coming few years, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then another program in terms of changing culture, starting with youth, is the School Success Program that Way to Go, which is the project with Cooperative Extension, does with the Ithaca City School District. And that is to talk to youth about ride sharing as a culture. So not just carpooling with someone a friend that you know, but actually ride sharing with whoever might need a ride. And this really helps kids participate in after school activities, participate in sports teams. And a second component to that is now students have been provided with, in the Ithaca City School District, free passes. So there's been handing out of passes at the high school, at Ithaca High School, at LACS, and at the 2 middle schools. So this is for students 17 and under, or if you're in high school and older 17, you can get a free TCAT pass called Free Ride. And so this is a huge opportunity for students to start to become familiar with using the bus. And part of this will be travel training, talking to students about how to use a bus, how to use how to read a map, how to use the different transit apps that are available. Okay, and so again, moving people away from this drive alone aspect is the education and outreach component. Way to Go, again, at Tompkins does a lot of this outreach. It's a lot of what we do in terms of education and our mission. To inform people on the different services that are available. We produce the transportation options brochure, which has all the different modes and transportation options in Tompkins County. We produce how-to videos such as how to ride the bus with a wheelchair, how to mount your bike on a bus, how to use Ithaca Car Share. We're doing one now for how to use Ithaca Bike Share so people can get online and just watch these educational videos. We've done in the past few years a car show with electric vehicles where we've got people from the county who will bring in their cars if they're driving electric and be part of a community event talking about what it's like to drive an electric vehicle, how much it costs them, to purchase. People can get in the cars, they can talk to the owners about the cars. So this is an owner-operated event, which is very grounded in community and community outreach. And it just helps to dispel some of the myths. It helps for people to come and be able to ask questions. We've gone to the Ellis Hollow Fair. So we go to areas where people are coming together as a community anyway. and that's been very successful. Also financing classes for purchasing an electric vehicle, buying guidance for using electric vehicles, where we have a mechanic come from Rich Road Imports. And then we also partner annually with 211 to do transportation troubleshooting when people call in if they need help with finding transportation, which is often a multimodal transportation. Ithaca Bike Share has been doing a lot on outreach and education as well. And so in addition to providing both bikes and helmets, they've got mechanic support and education through their new community bike shop that just opened in the last couple of weeks.
Hey, Dawn.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's Bike Walk Tompkins, all those things there?
Oh, yes. Yes,
Not
yes, yes.
Ithaca Bike Share, which
No,
is
no,
a
sorry,
separate-
you're right. It's Bike
Yeah.
Walk Tompkins.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. You're right, because you are Bike Walk Tompkins. Right. So Bike Walk Tompkins is doing both, all the Ithaca Bike Share as well as the bikes and helmets, the community bike shop, hosting guided group rides, an Ithaca walking map, and also doing some travel training for transit youth use. So the second thing I want to talk about in terms of these dimensions is how we're transitioning shared or public transportation to electrification of our transportation system. And I know I've talked a little bit about EVs, but I want to be clear that when we talk about electric vehicles, it's so much more than cars. Oftentimes, I think in the larger lexicon, electric vehicles also mean cars, and we need to really think about culturally how we shift that so it's not just electrification of the individual automobile, but it's electrification and diversification of many different transportation options. So cars, bikes, buses, scooters, etc. And part of that really has to do with how do we use this moment to also change the culture. So as we think about a new way of transportation that's electrified, how can we also then talk about different modes as part of this shift in transition? So in terms of electrification within Tompkins County, the city is looking at replacing their passenger fleet vehicles with electric. TCAT in 2021 launched their electric bike fleet, bus fleet. That's with 4 electric buses. They also have a NYSERDA grant, which I'm going to talk about in more detail later, for the purchase of 6 40-foot electric buses. CarShare have purchased their first 2 electric cars in 2021. This is one of them here at one of our EV events. And in the next 3 years, we'll be purchasing 9 electric vehicles, several of which will be placed in low-income neighborhoods. And that's part of a NYSERDA grant that I'm, again, going to elaborate on later. And then, of course, the launch of Ithaca Bike Share in late 2022. Transportation access in rural areas is another key component to this transition to multimodal and electrification. This is, as those of you know who live in rural areas, and many of us know who live in Tompkins County, rural area transportation is really difficult nut to crack because we are the towns and municipalities are very spread out. We've had fixed route transit, which can only access certain areas of our rural communities. It's difficult and something, though, that we need to think very strategically about. In TCCPI, we have had a program, Move Together New York, and you can see on the bottom right the map of New York State. The green counties are the ones that have been part of this Move Together New York program as the core. And the yellow counties are the ones that have jumped on board, in a large part because we are all connected by the fact that many people commute in and out of these counties, oftentimes into Tompkins County. The healthcare facilities are few and far between in these counties, and transit does not typically cross county boundaries. So one of the things that Move Together New York has been working on is how do we work with transit operators to do cross-county connections to bring these counties more in line with the way people's lives work in terms of crossing county boundaries on a regular basis. I mentioned before that TCAT is diversifying its fleet to enhance on-demand microtransit. So that is meant to reach further and deeper into Tompkins County. We're starting with a smaller number within the fleet, but the idea is that transit will be diversifying over time and be able to reach larger areas of the counties, of the county and our municipalities, and potentially cross counties, as I mentioned. I think, cars are always going to be playing a role within our rural areas. So the question is, how can we support the transition to electric vehicles? How can we support the transition to purchasing electric vehicles for particularly those that have faced barriers to transportation, particularly those who are low income? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the EV affordability programs that a few of us have been working on in the county. It's also a question of, can we integrate multimodal options? So again, driving to a centralized location and then being able to take a bus or take a bike into a downtown area, so to reduce some of the congestion and to reduce some of the burning of fossil fuels, if that's how people are driving into downtown areas. And also trying to enhance this culture of rideshare. I mentioned the work we're doing with ICSD students, but also there is this entity 511 that people can use throughout the state to rideshare for commuting purposes. So it's like connecting riders and drivers. So I just mentioned just a minute ago, reducing barriers to buying electric vehicles is an important component to look at within our whole, say, menu of options. And there's been a, there's been a number of efforts to educate the public, the broader public, on electric car purchasing. This is one of those technologies that was very much an early adopter. Electric vehicles were expensive. They've come down in price, but they still remain expensive. And so the question is, where can we intersect an interest with equity and affordability with a new technology that's emerging? So a couple of years ago, CCE partnered with Energetics to do a Drive Electric program, which was to introduce people to electric vehicles, doing some ride and drive events. Most of these there were 3 or 4 options at the time, not very much of a secondary market. That has changed a bit as the technology has evolved. There have been a number of used vehicles, electric vehicles coming into the market. With the pandemic, there was a much higher rate of purchasing of used cars, as many of you are familiar. So the secondary car market for EVs has become very scarce, which has been challenging to talk about affordability of electric vehicles when you're looking at used EVs and the market, the opportunities in the market are shrinking. So we are looking for that to shift, but it's very challenging at the moment. So it's been increasing people's awareness, though, on what the options might be for purchasing an electric vehicle. Extension-Tompkins has been doing a class with a mechanic from Ridge Road Imports on purchasing a used electric car and what one might look for in terms of making a good decision about that purchase, and then sharing information on rebates and tax credits. It's been difficult because the federal rebates are often not an option for those who are lower income, often moderate income. So increasing sort of those upfront tax credits is a crucial component to EV affordability. As another component, Go Ithaca, as part of a NYSERDA project that I'm going to talk about later again, has been working on the development of low or no credit programs for purchasing used EVs and leasing new batteries through this Ithaca Electric Transportation Access Project. And then there has been nationwide and statewide a lot of interest in subsidies for purchasing electric bikes. And it might be that Margaret has more information about whether that might be happening in Tompkins County. Improving infrastructure is another dimension that I wanted to talk about. A lot of it has to do with charging infrastructure, but then there are additional components to infrastructure that we need to really focus on. Tompkins, the Drive Electric project that I was talking about before in 2018, I looked at where countywide charging stations might be most beneficial, and 11 are installed. We're looking to install additional charging points around the county to keep up with the purchasing of electric vehicles. TCAT is working with TC3, New York Public Transit Association, and NYSEG to bring Park and Ride that have both public and TCAT charging stations. So someone could drive an electric vehicle to a Park and Ride and then take an electric bus. Another TCAT project is working with L Enterprises, Standard Hydrogen, and Shift Capital, the city of Ithaca, with a future Chainworks project to convert hydrogen fuel to electricity to charge TCAT buses. That would take some impact off the grid. And then also installing a charging dispenser, 8 pantograph charging dispensers for ease of charging within their own facility. And the city is deploying level 2 charging stations, the Green Street Garage. So that's just a few of what's happening at the moment in terms of charging infrastructure. Other infrastructure has been work on improving the connectivity of the Dryden Rail Trail. The city has identified funding opportunities for on-street charging analysis and looking at EV load forecasting. And the county is updating its countywide priority trail strategy on developing safety action plan across 10 municipalities with NISDOT. Bike Walk Tompkins is promoting in a variety of ways, in regular ways, investment in better infrastructure and services to support bicycling and walking, especially where safety is concerned. And broadband for remote areas and app access is something that we also need to really focus on. I don't have an update on what we're doing with broadband, but it has to be a piece of how we diversify transportation. So I've talked a little bit about equity throughout the presentation, but I wanted to say a few specific words about ensuring equity as we make this transition to electrification, as we think about multimodal options. It's critical that we bring populations that have been disadvantaged in terms of services, low-income populations along in this process, or it will have a much greater impact in terms of people being able to get where they need to go affordably. And so it needs to be a component of the work that we're doing here. So there is an entity now called the Tompkins County Transportation Equity Coalition, of which all of the transportation service providers in Tompkins County has a representative. We're currently recruiting for additional members. And really it's looking at how do we advance equity within the transportation sector to advance the quality of life for historically excluded people in Tompkins County. And as part of the coalition's work, we're now doing a transportation equity needs assessment, which is hearing from people throughout the county in terms of the barriers that they face. A lot of it has to do with focusing on different modes of transportation. So people's experiencing using TCAT, people's experiencing biking, experiences using biking, what are people's experiences if they are using Ithaca Car Share. It has questions about affordability and access and safety, all of which will feed into the work that each of the service providers in Tompkins County is doing in terms of enhancing not just electrifying services, but how do they make them more accessible to those that have traditionally typically been underserved. I talked about a few easy access programs that are available with Ithaca Car Share, Go Ithaca, Ithaca Bike Share, which are all programs for those with lower incomes to be able to access these different service options. And then as part of this electric transportation access project, Unbroken Promise Initiative, which has typically been working on the west side of Ithaca, is looking at micro business development around these on-demand transit services. So also enhancing, business components for Black-owned businesses as part of this whole, again, transition in transportation that we're seeing. And then looking at where shared mobility options are most needed, where they have not been before. So Ithaca Car Share, again, placing some of the new electric cars that they're going to be adding to their fleet in lower income areas, and bringing, again, the easy access programs, so enhancing people's ability to access these programs. And lastly, I wanted to talk about funding, planning, and policy. So this is a really interesting time in terms of federal and state funding for transportation, because there is such an interest in reducing carbon emissions. The state has their CLCPA project, Climate Leadership Community Protection Act. There is a lot of money that's flowing into transportation right now. Tompkins County has been exceptional in terms of qualifying, applying for, securing a lot of that funding. So a project that I've been mentioning, this Transportation Access Project, led by TCAT, but TCAT, Center for Community Transportation, which includes Bike Walk Tompkins and Ithaca Car Share. Go Ithaca, Unbroken Promise Initiative received $7 million as part of NYSERDA Clean Transportation Prize. And this is where I mentioned, the purchase of microtransit, electric microtransit, purchase of additional car shares, car share cars, Bike Walk Tompkins, and the purchase of electric bikes is in large part going to be coming from these funds. Go Ithaca was awarded $1.7 million in NYSERDA and NYSDEC grants to expand the program that I talked about earlier in terms of moving commuters into more of a multi-modal option. And then the county has applied for funds that are available through the carbon reduction program from the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. And we're also looking at incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly the energy and climate provisions, where Tompkins County, the city, other municipalities will be able to apply for funds through the IRA. And then in terms of planning and policy, there has just been a speed limit reduction citywide to 25 miles per hour. That's going to be implemented in 2023. So this has implications for safety, and safety in terms of those that are also walking and biking. It has the implications for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So that was a very big opportunity that's going to have a large impact within the city. And Bike Walk Tompkins has two efforts within the city right now that include supporting and developing a bicycle master plan and pedestrian ADA compliance master plan, and supporting full design and construction of a better bicycle network for Ithaca, which is 6 connected, safe bicycling corridors. And the city is applying for carbon reduction program funding, since it was not fully implemented within the city budget this year. And again, looking across county bus connections as part of planning. So this last slide, before I get to next steps, is mentioning the challenges that we're up against. So as I was putting this presentation together, and as I think about all the work that we're doing in transportation to diversify, to electrify, to provide access, we are up against some very big barriers, which is why we need to keep this conversation going. I'll just go through them, but with electrification, of course, we're always looking at grid capacity and the presence of charging stations. So keeping up with, as with the purchase of electric vehicles, keeping up with the infrastructure for charging, and then being very aware, of course, of grid capacity. Rural parts of the county are not fully served by transit multimodal options, which we know, which I've talked about a little bit here. Really, how can we be creative and innovative in addressing those challenges? While we would like to expand transit, and there's been a real push also to have transit be free, there is a shortage of TCAT drivers, of mechanics. There's supply chain issues that TCAT is grappling with, all in large part due to COVID. They're still recovering from a fall in ridership, which has to do with, the revenue that they can bring in. Scott Vanderpool has been very proactive in trying to address these issues, but these are challenges that transit is experiencing across the country. Ithaca Car Share is facing challenges related to affordability of insurance that puts it at risk for its continued existence. And there's efforts right now at the legislature, at the state level, get regulations in terms of how insurance is provided to car share businesses, nonprofits in the state. That's happening to try to shift legislation right now. We can talk more about that. There's, as I mentioned, the limited supply of used EVs for low and moderate income populations, persistent inequities that might leave populations behind in this big transition that we talked about. Financing, planning, and infrastructure that favors cars, not walkers, bikers, transit riders. So it's really, again, looking at what is the quality of our sidewalks, the configuration of our roads that favors cars, and how can we shift that in a way that doesn't necessarily mean huge infrastructure changes, but maybe the way that we use our roads. Lack of adaptation measures for accommodating the transition. As we look also at climate change and the impacts from climate change and looking at climate justice issues, we need to be adapting to climate change if we're going to be looking more at multimodal. So for example, bus shelters that can accommodate people when we're looking at extreme temperatures, extreme heat, extreme cool, impacts from flood events. So looking down the road and also in the short term and the longer term in terms of what climate change is going to mean for people who are trying to shift out and use multi-modes of transportation. And then we've got the bigger, larger global issues around electrification, from lithium mining, both ecological and societal impacts, scarcity issues, greenhouse gas emissions from EV production itself. These all come into play when talking about electrification, which is why it's not just how do we electrify, but really, again, how do we diversify so that people are using different modes, and that we are able to use the and shared mobility so that not everybody, again, is looking at how do we shift out of a car that we might use into an electric car. So in terms of next steps, there's planning. I know that Rachel is here from Park Foundation. I saw her, and she talked a few meetings ago about how do we do greater planning across our community in support of the Ithaca Green New Deal, which transportation is a part of, but definitely have to have a much more robust conversation. And I believe, we've been focusing on buildings and heating and cooling, transportation being the next piece of part of that conversation. How do we do more coordination with other sectors in terms of housing, affordable housing and density planning, other sectors such as health, infrastructure investment? These all are interrelated with transportation and transportation opportunities and barriers. And then testing models. We're testing some models today, as we talk about microtransit, testing models potentially in how we use our roadways differently. Streets Alive is something that we do where we shut down a road, but can we do that on a regular basis, for example, to see how it can accommodate biking, walking more effectively, more efficiently, and again, helping to shift that culture. Okay, so that's what I've got for my presentation. That was a lot, but I really wanted to cover the waterfront, and we can do some questions. Peter, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, I think that would probably be useful. Thanks, Dawn, for a presentation that really covers the waterfront. And I noted that Margaret, you had a number of observations, corrections during this part of our meeting. I wondered if you just wanted to maybe walk us through those. I know Dawn did mention one of them.
Don, I think you really nailed it in terms of the big picture, and that's a tremendous amount to pull together. And my small comment was just bike share is its own program, and that's all they do. Bike walk does some of the other things you mentioned. So Streets Alive, bike education, bike mechanic support, and so on. So bike share is just bike share. And we do play together under the Center for Community Transportation roof, and work together and help each other and coordinate. But we sort of have a broader mission, including outreach on the need for some of the infrastructure changes you mentioned and so on.
And I would invite, there's Ivany here from Go Ithaca, Fernando's here from ITCTC. Anything that you all might want to add or correct or enhance from what I shared? Because the waterfront is big. We're doing a lot. And Fernando says, yes, the 10th annual Streets Alive Film Festival at Cinemapolis. And what's the date on that again? Because that's coming up in a couple weeks.
March 10th. So
March 10th.
There'll be some inspiration for some of the visions that you talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a little fun too, right?
I'd just like to say that I put the Communify dashboard link into the chat. That's something that Go Ithaca is utilizing. It's a new part of our platform. It helps plan commutes. It gives you a carbon score based on your commute, and it allows for you to plan your commute in multi-modality. So it gives you suggestions as well for how to improve your commute or lower that carbon score. It gives you a point system. So we encourage anybody to enroll in Go Ithaca, especially if you're in the downtown Ithaca area. We're expanding to cover more of Tompkins County, but also to give some use to that platform and help us test it out.
Great, thanks so much. Is your name pronounced Ivany or?
Ivany, yeah.
Ivany, okay. I usually don't get those kinds of things right, but
No worries.
Really good, Pete. Really good.
if you could maybe send me some information that I could include in an email to everybody about Go Ithaca, or maybe the link to the website, something like that, that would be terrific.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank
And
you.
Fernando, you have your hand up, and I want to make sure you do say something about Ithaca car share and the liability insurance issue. I know, and I could include information on that as well for folks to write a letter. I sent mine in earlier this week, but I know they could use.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you, yeah. So I sent you an email that includes a template letter.
Okay.
And if you can forward that to everybody, it'd be great. So what's happening, folks, is that New York State has archaic insurance laws that are making it impossible for car share systems to get insurance. We're the only state in the union that doesn't allow the type of insurance that is needed for community car shares to work. So we are really in an existential kind of critical moment where if we don't get some changes out of Albany, it's very possible the car share is going to have to close down in May. So please, you're going to get an email with a template letter. Please fill it in and put your word out there to your elected officials to support legislative changes that are needed, which are kind of like a no-brainer situation. I think it's sort of a historical accident that we ended up in New York with this, where we are. So please do that. I wanted to highlight just a couple of details. When we talk about all that Dawn said, I kind of agree with everything she said, but it boils down to getting people to drive less and certainly to drive alone less. And often in transportation, we're told that, we're pie in the sky, everybody's driving, that's how we're going to get around. But, there's potential here. In Tompkins County, 63% of all trips are less than 3 miles. Okay, 52%, like over half of the trips are less than 2 miles. And nowadays, with e-bikes, that is like eminently doable. However, our missing mode is bicycle. We have not historically provided for bicycles in our community, so we don't have a good network of bike lanes and all that. And that's what Bike Walk Tompkins is working on. We have some allies and city staff. We also have some folks in city and other places that don't believe in bikes. So it's a challenge. It's what we're working on and with, but there's great opportunity in cycling. If you look at the numbers that Dawn put, already in the city, a lot of people walk to work and use transit. I also the last thing I'll say, I want to highlight how amazing it is. The systems that we have are really very unique. Nobody else has a car share system like ours. We may take it for granted, but it's really, really special. Gadabout, no other community in the state has a paratransit, a collaborative paratransit system that works countywide the way we do. In other communities, you get places like Challenge Industries and DSS. Everybody has their own vehicles and they're doing their own stuff. Here we have a united system, much more efficient, much better. TCAT works really well. They have challenges, but they're a terrific system. We have bike share. I mean, we have a lot here. We've done really well, but we continue to need support, and we certainly don't need archaic laws to short circuit the good stuff we've done, like car share. So I will be quiet now, but I thank the opportunity to talk about transportation here.
Yeah, thanks so much for all of those observations, Fernando. All really important contributions. Whenever I go to visit my family in Italy, and there are lots of Bardaglios there, a lot more than in the United States. I'm always struck.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm always struck by the Vespas that everybody scoots around on, and I just have sort of romantic attachment to the whole idea of Vespas, and something like right out of a Fellini movie. But I guess the electric bikes are going to be our version of that. It'll be interesting to watch them take hold. And thanks to you and Dawn and Margaret for making it clear to all of us that micromobility isn't just about babies learning how to walk. So that's a good thing to clear up. So Dave, how about you?
Well, first, just a quick comment on lithium. There is absolutely no shortage of commercially available lithium in the US. We have massive reserves, including, if you want to really go scrounging, the Teresa Brine network underneath New York State. So lithium availability is just not an issue. And it hardly contributes anything to the price of a battery. The battery systems, especially for cars, are just really big and complex, and they involve a lot of other stuff other than lithium. So, and then finally, if you really need to use stationary batteries to buffer lithium batteries, the sodium ion battery is the way to go. That's just, and again, there's no shortage of sodium either. I guess lastly, Tompkins County does a great job dealing with what we have with public transportation, especially compared to a city like Buffalo. And it's really commendable. But one comment is, is there anybody here that could bike from downtown Buffalo or downtown Ithaca up to the, say, power plant in Cornell using a regular bike?
Yes.
It's easy going downhill, but it's very difficult going uphill, especially as you age. Hills can be quite a bite. And of course, can you do it today? Which is probably not.
Boy,
Bike
God
share has
invented e-bikes.
e-assist.
Yes.
What's that, Martin?
Bike share has e-assist, Dave.
Just your regular bike. Can you make it up the hill?
I can, and I do every day.
Okay, well, very good. But I've tried making it from downtown Dryden up to TC3, and it's just it takes a lot of practice
Put
before
your
you can
bike on
even.
a bus.
No, downtown Dryden up to TC3. There's no bus. So it's great that they do what they can, but by and large, if you're pressed for time or you have multiple places to go or you're trying to carry things, cars are still going to be very useful.
You're
I have
absolutely
to
right.
comment here because I do have to comment because that could very well be for some people, and then there are many people who can't afford it. There are people that carry their groceries, that take their children, that commute to work and take multi-modes of transportation. We can do it better. And what I'm saying is also, let's take that opportunity to make it better for everybody so that it can help get people out of their cars. But not everybody has that choice. So let's use that issue also around equity to make the process better, to make the commuting better and easier for those who can't afford to purchase a car, and then it will benefit everybody.
Yeah, on that issue, Dawn, I was wondering when you touched on this, how the transportation equity needs assessment is gathering input from folks in the community. Is that a survey? Are you going to have focus groups? What's the approach going to be there?
Yeah, so we have been working, and it's a very inclusive process. So we're about a year into it. We've got a planning group that has representatives who are from the BIPOC community, low income, seniors, folks who live in urban areas and face boundaries, people who have disabilities, all inputting into who we reach out to get some input, what kind of questions we're asking people, and the survey itself. So we've already had focus groups with those 5-6 priority populations. And we're in the process of finalizing a survey that will come out mid-month. Again, we want to hear from those that have really faced barriers, but it will go out countywide. But yeah, it's been very interesting to hear from folks. And one of the big things that they talk about that has to do with what, this exchange that Dave and I just had is that if you don't have a vehicle and you are using multi-modes, it's incredibly stressful. It's incredibly stressful. Taking the time that it needs to take, being able to be flexible, being able to, yes, take children or go grocery shopping or find services or get access to services. That's a huge component. So you all will be seeing the survey. We encourage you to share the survey out. And we're really looking for the results to inform a lot of the work that we do, a lot of how we spend our money in terms of programming, in terms of purchasing, in terms of the vehicles that we're bringing into the community and where they're going.
Thanks, Dawn. That's helpful to know. Ingrid, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a
Hi.
question for Don. I'm really interested in this idea of culture change and shifting norms so that if people go from, instead of being afraid to try these different modes of transportation, that they feel like they're missing out if they don't try it. And I'm wondering, of the efforts that you've done in culture change, what have you found to be most effective?
And I would invite the others on the call, particularly Ivany and Margaret, to comment on this too. I think a familiarity, there's a certain amount of fear in terms of using transit, just in terms of even how do I find a bus stop? How do I get on the bus? How do I use the bus? And so travel training in what we've done as far as transit in the past has been effective at overcoming some of those fears. I imagine that Margaret's finding the same thing in terms of doing bike classes, helping people to ride a bike. People who didn't think they could ride a bike are now riding bikes, sort of overcoming those fears. Yeah, a lot of it is just the unfamiliarity. And that's also where we're trying to target youth and get youth familiar with using the bus. So it just becomes a part of what they know and a part of what they do. And it helps to have the free bus passes, which also takes away a certain stigma that only certain people use a bus. It should be everybody. Everybody has access to a pass. Everybody can try it. Everybody can use it. Yeah, that's one of the things that I would mention.
Thanks. Just having Ingrid ask that question reminds me about something we're working on at PRI. I've been on the board there for many, many years, as I think some of you know, and now am a trustee emeritus, but I'm serving on the facilities committee. And one of the things we're looking at is the possibility of putting in, of course, level 2 chargers, but also to get at least one level 3 charger in the parking lot at the Museum of the Earth. At least it's our understanding that there are actually no level 3 chargers between Ithaca and the outlying communities. You have to go all the way to Syracuse, I think, to get to the next level 3 charger. And so our thinking has been that if we put in a level 3 charger for at least people commuting from the north or going north after work, that might be a helpful service to provide. I'm just wondering if anybody else is aware of any other level 3 chargers that we haven't identified.
Not specifically, but I'll tell you that Route 13 is in the state's plan as part of the electric vehicle network for the state. So I expect that there will be monies from the federal laws that were recently passed coming through the state to put level 3 facilities along Route 13. They're trying to create a network that is statewide.
Yeah, no, that's great to know.
Facilitate long distance travel.
Yeah, we're looking at putting in something like 6 EV chargers in at the Museum of the Earth, and having at least one of them be level 3 for folks along that north-south axis. So that's helpful to know that there are plans in the works for level 3 chargers on Route 13. You have a question or comment too, again, Fernando?
Well, just real quick, just a detail, just what Dave said, made me think about this, that often in transportation, we work at the margins, and we don't need everybody to stop driving. We actually, if we can get 10% of people to shift 10%, or if we can get a shift of 10% of the trips to non-vehicle, non-car modes, it would be transformational. The problem is that we are completely dependent on cars, almost completely dependent on cars, and we really need to shift a percentage of those trips to other modes. And, you know, some trips will always need a car, and so you do those in a car. But those trips that could use a bike or could be on walk, we should provide people the option so that they can walk or bike for those trips. So if you can't get up the hill on a bike, then yeah, take the bus or drive. But you know, if you can do it in an e-bike, do it in an e-bike. And you should feel safe on the road so there's when I said before the bike is a missing link, is we need to build infrastructure so people can feel safe traveling in a bike. But it's really I've faced this before. People, oh, you want everybody to bike or walk? No, not everybody. Literally 7, 10%, 15% would be making the news. You know, it's really, that's where we're at. So thanks. I just wanted to make that point.
That's a great reminder, Fernando. Really appreciate
I'd like to weigh into the conversation.
Absolutely.
And then it would deal with both like feeling safe and whether you can bike out. Let's just be really blunt. Ithaca is terribly, terribly spoiled. And it's amazing what you can do when you have to do it. Everybody can take more bike trips. And if you're not in a physical shape to do that, then you can use an electric bike. I mean, I was up on the hill watching a mom with a baby using an electric bike. Everybody can, and everybody should. And I think that if we make the mentality and the community see each portion as a contribution to the bigger picture, then you assist. It's not low-income people's position that they should not be using cars and that everybody needs cars. I mean, that's a luxury. And not everybody has access, and not everybody will have access. So the people that do have access need to use them a little less.
Great. Thanks for that reminder, Avani. Dawn, you know, Rebecca is taking the day off today, well deserved, I would say. So she's not here. But I'm just wondering, you know, what your perspective is on where we are with the Ithaca Green New Deal and the need to bring transportation into the conversation, because a lot of the focus so far obviously has been on buildings.
Yeah, it has been. And again, I think it has to do with what Fernando just mentioned, which is we are such, the idea of, for those people that have cars, thinking about alternatives, it's so ingrained in the culture. And again, why I think it's become, transportation is that elephant in the room. Because it's just not, it requires a cultural shift. But as Ivany reminds us too, people are living in this culture. People are living in the culture of multimodal. And I think there's a lot to be learned there in terms of what we can do better. And then I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of how people are using different modes to teach others about what is possible and what is necessary. So yes, the Ithaca Green New Deal has been focused on building infrastructure, transitioning, heating and cooling. I think there was really strong leadership from Luis to say, this is the direction we're going to go. This is what we need to do. These are the percentages we need to do it. And I think a lot of folks who are working on heating and cooling with buildings said, yeah, let's all work together and do that. I think we've got very strong leadership and very strong agreement within the transportation community. But we can't just go in and shift everybody's decision making. So this really is a community raising awareness type of thing as well. I mean, many people who use buildings aren't going to know that that transition has happened. With transportation, you know, these are individual choices that people are going to make. So I think it's going to take that much more of an effort. And I think if the Ithaca Green New Deal could really raise the level of the conversation around transportation, and make it also, you know, a bigger centerpiece, it will take away potentially some of that fear, some of that stigma, some of that idea that, oh, well, we're just going to switch to electric cars and we'll be good.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it would, I think, be a good thing if that transportation community that you've referred to a couple times could find a way to educate Common Council on these issues too, because I think that's a big blind spot for them as well, not just the larger community, but those folks in particular, because they provide a lot of the leadership for city policy, obviously. Just one more thing, Don, I wanted to ask you about, and then we're going to have to move on to the second part of our agenda. But could you say a bit more about how the IRA is going to provide additional incentives for used EVs and not just new ones? I think that the IRA incentives for new EVs has gotten a lot of attention, but I think if you dig into it a little bit more, there are also incentives for used EVs. And I just wanted to make sure I was on the right track about that.
Yeah, I'm going to be completely honest. I don't know, but I'll look into it and let folks know.
Anybody else aware of that?
Go, Dave. That's why we're a community here.
I think it's about $4,500 that's available to purchase used EVs, and I think it's also in the form of a tax credit. So again, you have to be earning income in order to utilize the tax credit. But yeah, the IRA basically is full tilt ahead with electric vehicles. But on the other hand, there's also other ways that you can electrify transportation other than using batteries. And bear in mind, Ithaca used to have a nice trolley system before the likes of General Motors and Ford trashed it, just like they trashed this stuff in Hollywood, as you can find out if you ever watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good reminder, Dave. It's something I used to remind my students about back when I was a history professor and teaching the second half of the U.S. History Survey, that in fact, streetcars are a uniquely American invention. It got started here first before it migrated to Europe, but seems to have taken hold and is more deeply rooted in Europe now than the US. And as you just alluded to, largely because GM and Ford very early on did everything possible to root out streetcars so that they could sell more automobiles. At any rate, great. You've got your hand up again, Dave. Do you want to make one more observation?
One quickie, the New York Central Railroad used to actually have an electrified freight line from Ithaca to, or not from Ithaca, sorry, from Utica all the way to Niagara Falls. And that's another part of the transportation system that we don't really want to talk about right now. Freight is almost exclusively diesel oil. And of course, given the way the railroad situation is, which is a near cartel, that's not going to change much right away, but it's really easy to electrify rail. It's super easy. And that's actually a way of removing almost all diesel fuel used in the US is basically eliminate long distance truck driving and go that way. But, you know, the same also applies to transport too. It's just the most efficient way of transporting people around. And you don't need a battery for it.
Great, thanks. And thanks so much, Dawn, for, as I said, a really wide-ranging presentation, and obviously stimulated